Hey, deserving listeners, it's time to continue watching Big Ed on 90 Day The Single Life. Let's watch.
She basically told me that my daughter and her friend, apparently they were talking shit about Liz.
But how did she overhear? She didn't tell you?
She didn't tell me.
Okay.
So by the time we got to the hotel, she was upset. And Liz just stops talking. She ended up just going to bed. Well, guess what she did?
Okay, so we are hearing from Ed that they went to a club out with Tiffany and someone else, the daughter and someone else. So it's Ed, Liz, Tiffany, the daughter, and someone else. And Liz, they're leaving. Ed and Liz are leaving. Liz is upset. Ed asks what's wrong. Liz says, let's wait until we're back to the hotel. I'll tell you all about it. I just don't want to talk about it right now. We're in public. And Ed keeps pressuring, saying, what's going on? And Liz eventually keeps saying, no, it has nothing to do with you. Don't worry about it. We'll talk about it at the hotel. And Ed keeps pressuring and pressuring. Okay, so that's according to him. Can we imagine Ed maybe taking this pressuring thing a little too far? And then, who knows? But then Liz says, okay, fine. What happened was your daughter, Tiffany, and this other person, they were talking bad about me, and I was upset about that. And then Ed says, after that, Liz wasn't talking to him. Who knows? But I would suspect, given what we heard in the phone call, the infamous phone call, that Ed was maybe laying into her on some level, telling her that she's crazy. Who knows? There's just really no way to know. But let's kind of I'm going to keep that hypothesis in mind as we listen further to his side of the story. Yeah, I just don't know.
She booked her flight and left me the next morning, all by myself.
Right. So, according to Ed, he's like, what's going on? How come you're upset? And then he just lightly sort of suggests, hey, tell me about it. She tells it to him. She goes silent on him, and then she flies out of Vegas without telling him. So we can imagine Ed is leaving something out, right? And I'm guessing Liz will fill in the gaps.
No.
Yes. Sitting in this hotel room, all by myself, I felt like I was back in the Philippines when Rose and I broke up.
It's too much. You hurt me, you lie me.
Right. Did Ed learn from his mistakes with Rose? Seemingly not. So you are bound to repeat the past in your relationships if you do not spend a lot of time thinking about what led up to the destruction of his relationship with Rose. I've heard people have been commenting that he's in therapy, and that's great. Therapy can take a long time. Also, maybe he's not talking about his relationships in therapy. Maybe there are other kinds of things he's working on. Who knows? It's just hard to say. But therapy and personality change tends to take a long time. So maybe when he's in his 5th season on 90 Day Fiancé, maybe we'll start seeing a little bit more of some growth in him. Who knows?
Building this relationship, and then 3 weeks later, this happens. It's a freaking nightmare. I want to have a conversation with her today. So I texted Liz. She's gonna come over later, but I wanted to talk to you first and just try to figure this out.
All right, so Ed is triangulating his friend into his conflict with Liz. If the friend wants to be dysfunctional as a third member of the triangle, then she might say something like, well, it sounds like your girlfriend is crazy. Or maybe you should just break up with her or something like that. If you want to be functional, then you might say something, if she knows Ed accurately, she might say something like, well, what do you think you did that bothered her so much that made her leave Vegas? So that would be a good intro into another side of this conversation. Or, well, what do you think she needs to hear in order for the two of you to reconcile? Or how are the two of you going to work this out? Or what ways do you typically work on conflict that didn't go well for you in the past that you could actually learn from and do it differently this time?
Like,
You guys don't communicate. Talk about communication.
okay,
How she communicates. She shuts down. That's terrible for communication.
So she's assuming that Liz shut down instead of imagining that Liz might have had legitimate reasons for shutting down. So I don't know if that is necessarily helpful. Now, again, I don't know what happened in that fight, but I think given what we have seen, given what we heard in the phone call, we can imagine Liz might having some legitimate reasons as to why she distanced herself from him.
And she's young. And on top of that, getting in an argument because the daughter says something, she's supposed to be an adult. You can't storm out of everything. That's something my 8-year-old son does.
Yikes. Now, maybe we weren't there. We're just hearing it from Ed's side of the story. But I would bet anything that if Liz were to tell her side of the story, she would say something like, yeah, Tiffany was giving me some grief and we were leaving and I was upset and Ed asked me what was wrong and we were in a cab and we're in public and I didn't want to talk about it until we got back to the hotel. Plus, I didn't want to not talk about it at all, really, because it was about his daughter and I don't want to come in between him and his daughter. And so I didn't know what to do. And Ed picks up on her discomfort and says, hey, what's going on? She says, I don't want to talk about it. Let's wait till we get back. And Ed might consider that to be a threat to his attachment security with her. And we know from experience that when Ed feels a threat in his attachment, sometimes he will become an aggressor and he will use his words to bulldoze and to discount and to say to someone that they're effing stupid. So we could imagine him escalating in that way. Maybe she even contributed to it a little bit by saying some things to him, who knows, but we can imagine that he started to lay into her. Even if he was half as bad he was in that phone call, that would obviously really hurt her and give her very good reason, very wise reasons to skedaddle. For the friend, she is hearing Ed's side of the story, and her diagnosis is that Liz is an 8-year-old who doesn't communicate. Hey, deserving listeners, as you all know, I am constantly recommending that people go to therapy. We all need therapy from time to time. Well, one of the options available that is definitely worth checking out is BetterHelp. If you're looking for a therapist, I would give it a try by going to betterhelp.com/Kirk. Make sure you use the promo code Kirk because you get 10% off your first month, and it really helps us out. As you watch these videos, I know many of you have been motivated to find your own therapist, which is great because you deserve it. And I know also that it can be hard to find a good fit, find the right one for you. Well, one of the options available in terms of your shopping is to go to betterhelp.com/Kirk. I've been told you can start communicating with your therapist in under 24 hours. You can message your counselor at any time. Plus, you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions. I've also been told that it's often less expensive than in-person therapy, and you should know that this service is available to clients worldwide. So go to betterhelp.com/Kirk to get 10% off your first month today.
But Ed has two options. They decide they're gonna communicate, or you break up. That's it.
Why is love so hard?
It's not supposed to be easy. You know you can walk away, right?
I know I can walk away, but I don't want to walk away.
Right. So that's always not always, but it's frequently the friend's response. We see this often on the show. The triangulated third will just say, like, we'll just leave. And it's like, oh, really? Thank you for laying out that option. I hadn't thought about that, Yeah, okay, good. I'll just break up with the person. That'll end anytime I run into a conflict with someone that I'm in love with, I'll just break up with them. Thank you so much. Wonderful advice.
I'm not good at relationships. That's why I haven't been in one, but I do love her. I'm in love with her.
You can love anybody. I have loved more than one person.
So now she's just on an agenda of trying to convince him to break up with someone that he's in love with. Yeah. It happens all the time. It's not just, sometimes things happen in the show where I'm like, wow, that's kind of rare. But this kind of behavior is very frequent. I don't know if someone would be this adamant about it, but a lot of friends are just like, well, I don't understand. Like, why do you put up with this crap? Just move on, especially if she hears a lot of the negative sides of their relationship. Then the friends build up this idea that the relationship is basically 100% negative because that's all they've heard.
The feelings I have for Liz, I didn't have the same for Rose. She is who I want to be with. I'm in love with Liz, but we don't know how to communicate. And if we are going to be together, we have something we have to do.
Yeah, people say that all the time, even on this show. We don't know how to communicate. Yeah, I wonder what people mean by that sometimes. Well, 99% of the couples that come into my office, that's one of the first things they say, is we have trouble communicating. And if I was to imagine what people mean by that is that they don't know why, but they find themselves often in verbal arguments. And they don't know how to get out of them. They don't know how to prevent them. They don't know how to resolve them. And so they just have this conclusion. It's like, well, there's something about the way we communicate. But a much more accurate conceptualization would be something like, I get very attachment injured very easily. When she was in the car and she wouldn't tell me what was wrong, it really scared me. And because of my past attachment injuries, I had an overreaction and I panicked. And a habitual reaction to that panic is to bulldoze and aggressively try to control someone's mind, because I falsely believe that if I do that, it'll erase their negativity and they will once again be in love with me and we will have a secure relationship. So that's part of our problem. I wouldn't characterize that as a problem with communication. I would characterize that as a problem with attachment injury and habitual problematic and destructive reactivity. All right, well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.